Declassified, 1943. In the dense, sweltering jungles of Luzon, the Philippines, war had transformed everything. Villages that once hummed with harvest songs now whispered in fear. The Japanese occupation had turned peaceful farmers into fugitives and children into survivors. Among them was a 12-year-old boy named Jose Calderon, whose hands were calloused not from books but from rifles, traps, and the art of silent killing. Jose was not born a warrior. He was the son of Miguel Calderon, a farmer who had taught him to hunt wild boar in the mountains before the war came. His mother, Elena, was a woman of quiet strength who taught him prayers and patience in equal measure. Together, they had raised Jose in a world where survival meant understanding the language of the forest, the rustle of leaves that signaled danger, the flight patterns of birds that revealed hidden threats, the tracks in mud that told stories of prey and predator. When the Japanese swept through Luzon in 1942, Miguel disappeared. Some said he joined the guerrillas in the highlands. Others whispered he had been executed in the town square as a warning. Jose never learned the truth. All he knew was that one morning his father was there, and by evening he was gone. The boy's childhood ended that day. In its place grew something harder, sharper, forged in the furnace of necessity. The occupation was brutal. Japanese patrols moved through villages with terrifying efficiency, confiscating food, interrogating suspected resistance sympathizers, and executing anyone who defied their authority. For Jose's village of San Rafael, nestled in a valley surrounded by jungle-covered ridges, survival meant invisibility. The villagers learned to hide their harvests, to speak in coded whispers, to move like shadows when the enemy approached. But Jose learned something else. He learned that the skills his father had taught him, the patience of a hunter, the discipline of the stalk, the precision of the kill, could be turned against the invaders. While other children hid in their homes, Jose began to watch. He observed the patrol patterns, noting the times they arrived, the routes they took, the number of soldiers in each unit. He studied their weapons, their formations, their vulnerabilities. He noticed that the Japanese soldiers, despite their training and discipline, were strangers to this terrain. They walked loudly through the undergrowth, breaking branches and cursing at the heat. They bunched together on narrow trails, creating perfect targets. They assumed superiority, never imagining that a child could be their greatest threat. Jose's first act of resistance was small but significant. A Japanese patrol had confiscated the village's rice stores, leaving families to starve. That night, Jose crept into their encampment, moving with the silent grace his father had taught him. He didn't attempt anything heroic. He simply cut the straps on their supply sacks, allowing the rice to spill across the muddy ground, ruined and useless. By dawn, he was back in his bed, and the soldiers were left cursing and hungry. It was a minor victory, but it awakened something in the boy. He realized that size and age meant nothing in the jungle. Here, knowledge was power. Patience was strength, and invisibility was the ultimate weapon. As weeks turned to months, Jose's role in the village quietly shifted. The elders began to consult him before making decisions. Where should they hide the food? When were the patrols likely to come? Which trails were safest? The boy who once helped his mother with chores was now a tactical advisor, respected and feared in equal measure. But respect came with a price. Jose saw things no child should see. He watched neighbors dragged from their homes. He heard screams in the night. He found bodies left as warnings on the village outskirts. Each atrocity hardened him further, replacing innocence with cold calculation. His eyes, once bright with boyish curiosity, became distant and watchful. His mother noticed the change and wept in private, mourning the son she was losing, even as she relied on the survivor he was becoming. The turning point came in March 1943. Intelligence reached the guerrillas that a Japanese platoon, 15 men strong, was heading towards San Rafael. Their mission, to eliminate suspected resistance fighters and seize remaining supplies. The guerrilla fighters prepared to evacuate, knowing they were outnumbered and outgunned. But Jose had a different idea. He approached the guerrilla commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Reyes, with a proposal that seemed insane. He would neutralize the platoon himself, alone. Using nothing but the hunting strategies his father had taught him. Reyes laughed at first, then saw the boy's expression. There was no bravado, no childish fantasy, only cold, hard certainty. Against his better judgment, Reyes agreed. If the boy failed, they would intervene, but Jose would have his chance. As the sun rose on the day of the ambush, Jose prepared his weapons. His father's old rifle, meticulously cleaned and oiled, and his intimate knowledge of every rock, tree, and shadow in the surrounding jungle. He was no longer just a hunter. He was about to become a legend. Dawn broke over the jungle with deceptive beauty. Golden light filtered through the canopy, illuminating dewdrops on spider webs and casting long shadows across the forest floor. To the untrained eye, it was paradise. To Jose Calderon, it was a battlefield waiting to be activated. He had been awake since before first light, moving through the pre-dawn darkness with the confidence of someone who knew every root and stone by heart. His destination was a narrow ravine 3 kilometers east of San Rafael, a natural choke point where the trail from the Japanese garrison funneled through a gap barely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast. His father had taken him hunting there countless times, teaching him how wild boar used the same route season after season, predictable in their patterns. Soldiers, Jose had learned, were no different from animals. They followed the path of least resistance, stuck to established trails, and rarely looked up. The ravine was perfect. Steep walls rose on both sides, covered in dense vegetation that would make climbing difficult under fire. The trail itself curved sharply, limiting visibility and preventing the platoon from seeing what lay ahead. Most importantly, a massive fallen tree lay across the upper end, creating a natural barrier that would slow any retreat. Jose began his preparations with methodical precision. First, he studied the wind direction, ensuring his scent wouldn't carry to the approaching soldiers. Then he selected 3 firing positions, each offering clear sightlines to different sections of the kill zone. He would not stay in one place. That was how hunters became hunted. His primary position was 15 meters up in a gnarled mahogany tree that leaned over the ravine. From this vantage point, he could see the entire length of the trail below. The branches were thick enough to support his weight, but dense enough to conceal his silhouette. He tied his rifle to a branch with vine rope, ensuring he could retrieve it quickly if he needed to relocate. His secondary position was behind a cluster of volcanic rocks, halfway down the ravine wall, offering a perpendicular angle to his primary perch. His tertiary position was a shallow depression beneath the roots of a strangler fig, providing ground-level coverage and an escape route into deeper jungle. Next came the psychological preparation. Jose understood that his greatest weapon was not the rifle, but fear. He scattered broken branches and disturbed undergrowth at irregular intervals along the trail, creating the impression of multiple ambushes. He knew that confused, frightened soldiers made mistakes, fired wildly, and broke formation. By the time the sun cleared the mountains, his trap was set. All that remained was the waiting. For most people, the hours before combat were agonizing. For Jose, they were familiar. This was no different from waiting for a wild boar to emerge from its hiding place, except the stakes were infinitely higher. At precisely 0900 hours, he heard them. The sound carried through the jungle with crystal clarity, the clank of equipment, the rhythm of boots on packed earth, voices speaking in Japanese. Jose's heart rate remained steady. He had learned to control his breathing, to suppress the body's natural panic response, to become as calm as the trees around him. Through gaps in the foliage, he caught his first glimpse of the platoon. 15 men, just as intelligence had reported. They moved in a loose column formation, rifles slung casually across shoulders. The lead soldier was young, probably 19 or 20, scanning the trail ahead with obvious boredom. Behind him walked a sergeant, older and more alert. But even he showed signs of complacency. They had no idea they were walking into a tomb. Jose waited until the entire platoon entered the ravine. Discipline, patience. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Never take the first shot. Wait until the prey is committed. Wait until retreat is impossible. The leading soldiers reached the fallen tree and paused, discussing whether to climb over or find another route. The middle of the formation compressed as men bunched together. The rear guard, instead of maintaining security, stopped to light cigarettes. Perfect. Jose's first shot shattered the morning peace like breaking glass. The lead soldier dropped instantly, a clean hit to the chest. Before his body hit the ground, Jose was already traversing to his second target, the sergeant, whose experience made him the most dangerous threat. The sergeant was fast. He was already shouting orders and bringing his rifle up when Jose's second shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into two other soldiers. Chaos erupted. The remaining soldiers scattered, some diving for cover behind rocks, others sprinting back toward the trail entrance, two freezing in place with paralytic fear. They fired wildly into the canopy, bullets snapping through leaves and thudding into tree trunks, but none came close to Jose's position. He had already moved. Slipping down from the mahogany tree with practiced ease, he relocated to his secondary position behind the rocks. From this new angle, he could see three soldiers huddled together, their backs exposed as they fired upward at where they thought he had been. 3 shots, 3 targets. 2 fell immediately. The third took a round through the leg and went down screaming. The psychological effect was devastating. The remaining soldiers could not determine where the shots were coming from. The ravine walls created echoes that made it seem like they were surrounded. The carefully placed false signs made them believe they were outnumbered. One soldier broke completely, throwing down his rifle and running blindly up the trail. He made it perhaps 20 meters before tripping over one of Jose's deliberately placed obstacles and sprawling face first into the mud. He stayed there, sobbing. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 8 Japanese soldiers were dead or wounded. The remaining 7 had either fled in blind panic or surrendered, hands raised, calling out in broken Tagalog for mercy. Jose did not emerge immediately. He waited, watching from the shadows, ensuring it was not a trick. Only when he was certain did he give a bird call, the signal for the guerrillas waiting in reserve to move in and secure the prisoners. Captain Reyes arrived minutes later, staring at the carnage in disbelief. 15 combat-trained soldiers neutralized by a 12-year-old boy with a hunting rifle. It seemed impossible, but the evidence lay scattered across the ravine floor. The captain approached Jose, who sat on a rock, methodically cleaning his rifle. "How?" was all Reyes could manage. Jose looked up, his expression unreadable. "They hunted like men," he said quietly. "I hunted like the jungle." News of the ambush spread through the resistance network like wildfire. Within days, every guerrilla unit from Bataan to the Cagayan Valley had heard the story of the boy who had single-handedly decimated a Japanese platoon. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, the kind of myth that wars naturally produce. Others believed, but assumed the child had merely gotten lucky, stumbling into a tactical advantage he couldn't possibly have planned. Captain Reyes knew better. He had seen the kill zone, studied the positioning, analyzed the precision of each shot. This was no accident. This was tactical brilliance executed with surgical precision. The boy possessed an instinctive understanding of terrain, psychology, and timing that most professional soldiers never achieved. The Japanese response was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours of the ambush, Colonel Yamamoto, commander of the regional garrison, ordered reprisals. 2 neighboring villages were burned. 12 civilians were executed in the town square of Tarlac as a warning. Patrol strength was doubled, and soldiers were ordered to shoot first and investigate later when encountering anyone in the jungle. But the crackdown had an unintended consequence. Rather than intimidating the population, it ignited them. Villagers who had remained neutral now quietly funneled information to the guerrillas. Farmers who had avoided the resistance began hiding weapons and supplies, and Jose Calderon, the quiet boy from San Rafael, became a symbol of defiance. The guerrilla leadership recognized the opportunity. Captain Reyes proposed bringing Jose into the resistance network, not as a fighter. His youth made that politically complicated, but as an instructor. If one boy with hunting skills could achieve such results, imagine what properly trained guerrillas could accomplish using similar tactics. Jose was reluctant. He had not ambushed the platoon seeking glory or recognition. He had done it to protect his village, to strike back at the people who had taken his father. The attention made him uncomfortable, and the weight of those 8 deaths sat heavily on his conscience. He was 12 years old. He should have been worrying about school and friends, not the mechanics of killing. His mother, Elena, made the decision for him. One evening, as they prepared a meager dinner of rice and vegetables, she placed her hand on his shoulder. "Your father taught you to hunt so we could eat," she said softly. "Now you must teach others to hunt so we can survive. This is your burden, Jose. You cannot refuse it." So Jose became a teacher, though he never spoke of himself that way. Groups of guerrillas would arrive at San Rafael under cover of darkness, and the boy would lead them into the jungle, showing them what his father had shown him. He taught them to move silently by placing their feet carefully, rolling from heel to toe to avoid snapping twigs. He demonstrated how to use mud and leaves for camouflage, how to control breathing to remain still for hours, how to read the forest for signs of danger. Most importantly, he taught them to think like hunters rather than soldiers. "Soldiers want to win battles," he would say in his quiet, measured voice. "Hunters want to survive. If you think like a soldier, you will die. If you think like a hunter, the jungle becomes your ally." His methods were unorthodox and initially met with skepticism. Hardened fighters twice his age resisted taking orders from a child. But when they applied his techniques and began achieving results that matched or exceeded his own ambush, the resistance evaporated. Jose's youth became irrelevant. His effectiveness spoke louder than his age. Over the following months, Japanese casualties in the region increased dramatically. Patrols that ventured into the jungle often failed to return. Supply convoys were ambushed with devastating precision. Communication lines were cut repeatedly. The Japanese could not identify a pattern because each attack was unique, adapted to specific terrain and circumstances, but all bore the hallmarks of Jose's philosophy: patience, precision, and disappearance. Colonel Yamamoto became obsessed with finding the ghost of Luzon, as his men had begun calling their invisible enemy. Intelligence reports suggested a master tactician, probably an American advisor or a Filipino officer trained in unconventional warfare. The possibility that it might be a child never entered their calculations. Yamamoto deployed tracking teams, brought in dogs, and offered substantial rewards for information. Villagers were subjected to brutal interrogations. Anyone suspected of supporting the guerrillas faced immediate execution. The occupation, already harsh, became savage. But the Japanese faced an insurmountable problem. They were fighting an enemy who understood the terrain at a cellular level, who had been shaped by it since childhood, and who moved through it as naturally as water flowing downhill. Every tactical advantage they possessed, superior numbers, better weapons, formal training, meant nothing in an environment where visibility extended barely 20 meters and every shadow could conceal death. Jose, meanwhile, was changing. The burden of teaching killing, of watching his methods used again and again, began to erode something essential inside him. He rarely smiled anymore. His sleep was troubled by nightmares, not of combat, but of his father, standing in the jungle, watching him with sad, disappointed eyes. One night, after a particularly successful ambush that killed 17 Japanese soldiers, Jose sat with Captain Reyes by a campfire. "How many is enough?" he asked suddenly. Reyes looked at him, understanding the question beneath the question. "There is no enough in war, Jose, only victory or defeat. My father hunted to feed us," Jose said, staring into the flames. "He never took more than we needed. He taught me to respect what we killed, to use every part, to waste nothing. But this—" He gestured vaguely at the dark jungle. "We kill, and nothing changes. They send more soldiers. We kill them too. When does it end?" "When they leave," Reyes said simply, "or when we're all dead." Jose nodded slowly, accepting the grim mathematics of resistance. He was 12 years old, and he had already killed more men than most soldiers did in entire careers. The boy who had once chased birds through rice paddies now carried a weight that bent grown men. But he also carried something else, the absolute conviction that what he was doing mattered. Every Japanese soldier killed was one less threat to his village, one less rifle pointed at his mother, one less piece of the machinery that had devoured his father. It was a dark comfort, but it was comfort nonetheless. As the fire burned down to embers, Jose made a silent promise to the memory of his father. He would continue hunting, he would continue teaching, and when the war finally ended, if he lived to see that day, he would return to the mountains and hunt only wild boar again, leaving the ghosts of men behind in the jungle where they belonged. By the autumn of 1944, Jose Calderon had become something more than human in the eyes of both friend and foe. To the guerrillas, he was a talisman, proof that the occupied could defeat the occupiers through cunning and courage. To the Japanese, he remained a phantom, an inexplicable force that defied every attempt at elimination. But to Jose himself, he was simply tired in a way that sleep could never cure. The guerrilla movement had grown exponentially. What had once been scattered bands of desperate fighters now operated as a coordinated network spanning multiple provinces. Jose's tactics had been disseminated throughout the resistance, adapted and refined by dozens of commanders. Ambushes that once would have been suicidal now succeeded with regularity. The Japanese found themselves trapped in an invisible war where the jungle itself seemed hostile. But success bred complacency, and complacency bred mistakes. In November, Captain Reyes planned an ambitious operation, a simultaneous assault on 3 Japanese outposts along the main supply route to Manila. The plan relied heavily on surprise and the element of invisibility that Jose's methods provided. Reyes asked Jose to personally lead one of the assault teams, targeting the weakest outpost near the village of Santo Tomas. Jose accepted, though something about the operation troubled him. His father had taught him that successful hunts relied on knowing when to strike and when to wait. This felt rushed, driven more by ambition than tactical necessity. But he was 12 years old, and Reyes was the commander. He swallowed his doubts and prepared his team. The assault team consisted of 8 guerrillas, all trained in Jose's methods, all veterans of previous ambushes. They moved into position under cover of darkness, approaching the outpost with practiced silence. The plan called for them to neutralize the sentries, plant explosives on the ammunition depot, and withdraw before the garrison could respond. Everything went perfectly until it didn't. The first sentry fell without a sound. Jose's knife worked as precise as his marksmanship. The second sentry was eliminated by one of his team members with equal efficiency. They reached the ammunition depot and placed the charges, but as they began their withdrawal, a Japanese officer emerged from the barracks, drawn by some instinct or random chance. He saw them. For a frozen moment their eyes met, Jose's dark and calm, the officer's widening with recognition and alarm. Then the officer shouted, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. The outpost erupted. Lights blazed on, soldiers poured from buildings, rifles firing blindly into the darkness. Jose's team scattered according to plan, each man following prearranged escape routes, but the jungle that had always protected them now became a maze of confusion. In the darkness, disoriented by gunfire and shouts, two of Jose's team members ran directly into a Japanese patrol. The screams that followed would haunt Jose for the rest of his life. He had a choice in that moment: follow protocol and escape, preserving himself for future operations, or attempt a rescue that would almost certainly end in death. His training said flee, his heart said something different. Jose circled back, moving through the chaos with the fluidity of smoke. He found the two captured guerrillas being dragged toward the barracks, hands bound, rifles pressed against their backs. One was bleeding heavily from a head wound. The other was Pedro, a young fighter barely older than Jose himself, who had become something like a friend. The tactical part of Jose's mind calculated odds and found them impossible. 6 armed soldiers, alert and prepared, against one boy with a rifle and limited ammunition. Even with surprise, even with perfect execution, he could not save them both. But he could not abandon them either. He made his decision. His first shot killed the soldier holding Pedro. His second took down the one guarding the wounded guerrilla. Chaos erupted again, but this time Jose had no element of surprise. Bullets tore through the foliage around him as he worked his rifle's bolt, firing, relocating, firing again. He managed to kill 2 more soldiers before his rifle jammed. Mud in the mechanism, the curse of jungle warfare. He dropped it and drew his knife, knowing it was futile but unable to stop. This was no longer tactics. This was desperation. A bullet caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the undergrowth. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and overwhelming. He tried to rise, but his left arm wouldn't respond. Through blurring vision, he saw a Japanese soldier approaching, rifle raised for the killing shot. Then Pedro was there, hands still bound but moving with furious determination. He slammed into the soldier, knocking the rifle aside, using his head as a weapon since his hands were useless. Other guerrillas emerged from the jungle, the rest of Jose's team returning despite orders, unwilling to abandon their teacher. What followed was brutal and close quarters, fought with knives and rifle butts and desperate fury. When it ended, the outpost was in flames, the ammunition depot exploding in a spectacular display that lit up the night sky. Jose's team withdrew, carrying their wounded, leaving behind 14 dead Japanese soldiers and the burning wreckage of what had been a secure position. But they also left behind something else: Jose's rifle. The one his father had given him, still jammed and lying in the mud where he had dropped it. The guerrillas carried Jose to a hidden field hospital, a cave system where a Filipino doctor treated wounded resistance fighters. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting bone, but infection was a serious risk. For 3 weeks, Jose drifted in and out of fever dreams, his body fighting battles his mind couldn't follow. When he finally woke, truly woke, Captain Reyes was sitting beside his cot. "The other 2 outposts fell as planned," Reyes said quietly. "The supply route is cut. Manila garrison is in disarray. By every measure, the operation was a success." "And by others?" Jose asked, his voice weak. 2 dead, 3 wounded, including you. Pedro lost his left eye." Reyes paused. "You should have withdrawn. You know that. Your father's teachings. Never risk the hunter for the hunted." "My father also taught me that some things matter more than survival," Jose replied. Reyes nodded slowly. "You're 13 now, Jose. Did you know that? Your birthday was 2 weeks ago, while you were unconscious. 13 years old, and you've seen more combat than most soldiers see in a lifetime." Jose said nothing. 13 felt no different from 12. Age was just a number now, meaningless against the weight of everything he carried. "The Americans are coming," Reyes continued. "Intelligence says MacArthur is planning to return, maybe within months. The war is ending, Jose. Your war can end too." But Jose knew better. Wars might end, but what they did to people lasted forever. He closed his eyes and saw his father's rifle lying in the mud, abandoned, lost. It felt like prophecy. The American liberation of the Philippines came not with a whisper, but with thunder. In October 1944, General Douglas MacArthur waded ashore at Leyte, fulfilling his famous promise to return. The event transformed the war overnight. Japanese forces, already stretched thin and demoralized, began a fighting retreat that would last months, but whose outcome was never in doubt. For Jose Calderon, now 13 and recovering from his wound, liberation brought not joy, but a strange emptiness. The thing that had defined his existence for 2 years, the constant threat, the perpetual vigilance, the need to hunt or be hunted, was evaporating. American soldiers and Filipino Commonwealth troops swept through Luzon with overwhelming force, pushing the Japanese into increasingly desperate defensive positions. The guerrillas who had operated in shadow now emerged into daylight, celebrated as heroes. Captain Reyes was commissioned as a major in the Philippine Commonwealth Army. Other resistance leaders received medals, promotions, and the gratitude of a liberated nation. Jose received visitors, American officers who wanted to meet the legendary boy warrior, journalists seeking stories of resistance and courage, even a photographer from Life magazine. He hated every moment of it. The attention felt wrong, obscene even. They wanted tales of glory, but all Jose had were memories of blood and fear. They called him a hero, but he felt like a survivor of something that had hollowed him out from the inside. When an American colonel asked him to recount the ambush that had started everything, Jose gave a flat, mechanical description devoid of emotion. The colonel seemed disappointed, as if expecting adventure rather than trauma. His mother understood. Elena had watched her son transform from a child into something she barely recognized. Not a man, for he was too young, but not a boy either. Something in between, something the war had created and could never uncreate. She held him when the nightmares came, asked no questions, and grieved silently for the childhood that had been stolen. In January 1945, American forces liberated San Rafael. The Japanese garrison that had terrorized the region for years melted away into the mountains, and the village celebrated with festivals and prayers. Jose attended mechanically, accepting embraces and congratulations while feeling nothing. He kept searching faces in the crowd, looking for his father, knowing he would not find him, but unable to stop hoping. The truth came in February, delivered by a former guerrilla who had been captured and held in the same prison as Miguel Calderon. Jose's father had been executed in August 1942, shot in the courtyard of Fort Santiago in Manila, along with 17 other suspected resistance sympathizers. He had died before Jose ever fired his first shot, before the ambush, before any of it. The news should have devastated him, but Jose felt only a dull acceptance. Some part of him had known all along. The jungle had taught him to recognize death, and he had sensed his father's absence not as possibility, but as certainty. Still, the confirmation closed a door he had kept desperately ajar for 2 years. After the funeral service, a symbolic ceremony since there was no body to bury, Jose walked into the jungle alone. He went to the ravine where he had ambushed the Japanese platoon, now overgrown and peaceful, already being reclaimed by the forest. He sat on the same rock where Captain Reyes had found him after the battle, and for the first time since his father's disappearance, he wept. He cried not just for his father, but for the 8 soldiers he had killed in this place, for the dozens more who had died because of tactics he had taught, for Pedro's lost eye and the 2 guerrillas who had died at Santo Tomas. He cried for his own lost innocence and for the weight of choices he had been too young to fully understand when he made them. When the tears finally stopped, he made a decision. He would not forget what the jungle had taught him, the patience, the discipline, the understanding of nature and survival, but he would never hunt men again. That part of his life was over. The war officially ended in August 1945 with Japan's surrender. By then, Jose had already begun the slow process of returning to something resembling normal life. He attended school for the first time in 3 years, sitting in a classroom with children who seemed impossibly young and innocent. He struggled with mathematics and history, subjects that felt absurd when measured against what he had experienced, but he excelled in other ways. He became the village's best tracker and hunter, providing game for families still recovering from the occupation's deprivations. He never spoke of the war, unless directly asked, and even then gave only minimal answers. The legendary ghost of Luzon slowly faded into a quiet teenager who preferred the company of the forest to people. Years later, when historians came to document the Philippine resistance, they sought Jose out. By then, he was in his 20s, married, with a daughter of his own. They wanted him to describe his tactics, to explain how he had achieved what should have been impossible. He gave them the technical answers they sought, but nothing more. What he did not tell them, what he could not explain, was the cost. How victory and trauma were inseparable. How the skills that had saved his village had also broken something fundamental inside him. How he still woke sometimes in the night, heart racing, convinced he was 13 again and being hunted through the jungle. He did not tell them that he had taught his daughter to hunt, but only for food, and that he made her recite a prayer for every animal they killed. Or that he refused to let her touch a rifle until she was 16, and even then, only after making her promise never to point it at another human being. He did not tell them that he visited the ravine once a year, alone, and spoke apologies to ghosts only he could see. The historians wrote their accounts, focusing on tactics and results. They called Jose Calderon a brilliant unconventional warrior, a symbol of Filipino resistance, a testament to courage in the face of overwhelming odds. All of these things were true, but they were not the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and more terrible. He had been a boy who learned to kill because the alternative was watching everyone he loved die. The jungle had taught him survival, but survival had cost him the ability to ever feel fully at peace again. In his old age, Jose would sit on his porch in the mountains of Luzon, watching his grandchildren play, and think about his father's lessons. Miguel Calderon had taught him to hunt so they could eat, to respect the forest, to take only what was needed. The war had perverted those lessons into something darker, necessary, but destructive. But the final lesson, the one Jose understood only after decades, was the most important. The true measure of a hunter was not what he killed, but what he chose not to kill. And the true measure of a warrior was not the battles he won, but the peace he built afterward. Jose Calderon, the ghost of Luzon, the boy who neutralized a Japanese platoon before his 13th birthday, died peacefully in 1998 at the age of 67. He left behind a family, a legacy of resistance, and a story that became legend. But he also left behind something else, a reminder that even the most necessary violence leaves scars, and that the children we send to war never truly come home unchanged. The jungle remembers everything, and so did